guys. Tonight we start in the soft hour, where even the myths grow quiet. The moon hangs low, painted in diluted gold, and the shadows don't quite know which direction to stretch. You're walking through a corridor of forgotten daughters, their names stitched into marble, but their stories carved with bitterness. The torches flicker, but this isn't Olympus. This is the hallway of women who never asked to be lovely, but were punished for it anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first girl you meet isn't Helen of Troy, not yet. Right now, she's just Helen, the daughter of Leda, not born from anything as mundane as biology, but from myth's favorite parlor trick, swan seduction. Zeus, in feathered disguise, descended on Leda, and Helen was the result. Maybe. Or maybe that's just the version men like to tell, where beauty is a divine accident and not something girls are blamed for. Helen is young, not yet the face that launched ships. Right now she's just seen. People stop when she walks by. The servants whisper. Strangers linger too long. And Helen's still a child in most versions, learns early that beauty isn't praise. It's a mirror she didn't ask to hold, one that reflects what others want to see. At some point, kings and princes begin sending messengers, not for alliances, for her. They don't want her mind. They want her face beside their throne. The world begins dividing itself into men who want Helen and men who want to keep her from someone else. Historians still argue whether Helen was complicit in the choices that followed, whether she fled with Paris, or was taken, or chose silence. But here, in this dim hallway, you see the version that matters most. A young girl surrounded by older men with louder voices. Tyndareus, her mortal father, knows the danger. Beauty like Helen's can start wars, so he forces all her suitors to swear an oath that they'll defend the chosen husband, whoever he may be. It sounds noble. It's not. It's just politics with perfume. Helen marries Menelaus, Spartan king, stern chin, unearned entitlement. For a while there's calm, then Paris arrives. Prince of Troy, the apple holder, the golden boy who was promised the fairest woman alive. And Helen, she becomes prophecy with skin. Whether she loved him or not, well, that depends on which bard you ask. Some say she followed him willingly. Some say she was enchanted. Others say she screamed. No version seems to care much how she felt about any of it. And so, the war begins. Not for territory, not for justice, but for the right to own the woman whose beauty made gods jealous. Ships gather, spears sharpen, names become legend. Achilles, Agamemnon, Odysseus, Hector, they all march under banners of revenge. But the real battle is over, something none of them can articulate. Who gets to define what beauty is worth? Helen watches from towers, from ships, from scrolls, and still her face is all anyone remembers. You find her now in this quiet place far from the flames and the armor and the endless verses. She's sitting on a bench, older now. Her hair has silver at the ends. Her shoulders don't carry the same posture as the marble statues you've seen of her. She looks tired, not old, just done being talked about. She sees you, and she doesn't smile. She nods. She knows why you're here. She's been waiting, not to tell you about the war, not to defend herself, but to ask a single question. Why do they still think beauty is something I did to them? You sit. The silence between you isn't heavy. It's knowing. Helen picks up a stone, turns it in her hand, and then she says, "They carved my face into 1,000 paintings, but not one let me close my eyes. There's a pond nearby, quiet, still." Helen stands, walks to the edge. She doesn't look into it. She looks past it. And for the first time tonight, you wonder what it's like to have the whole world define itself around your reflection, and never once ask what you actually see when you look back. Fringe scholars have floated the idea that Helen was a political construct, a symbol of diplomacy, war, and erotic fear, that her myth was a way to warn women what happens when you shine too brightly. But sitting here beside her, that theory feels hollow, because Helen is not a warning. She's a question mark at the end of 1,000 assumptions. She's the echo of what it costs to be seen, but never heard. The first price of beauty. It wasn't a war. It was the silence before it. And now you hear her, not as a muse, not as a prize, just as a woman who learned that visibility is a kind of violence when you don't get to choose it. You rise. Helen does not say goodbye. She doesn't need to. She's already been left enough. And you're only just beginning. You keep walking, though your footsteps feel heavier now. Maybe it's the fog curling around your ankles, or maybe it's the weight of 1,000 expectations settling over your shoulders, the kind only myth can make feel inevitable. The air thickens, not unpleasant, just dense with memory, and you're not alone anymore. She's waiting for you. Leda, not a goddess, not a queen, not yet. She's just a woman trying to survive being seen. The swan story comes first, of course. It always does. You've heard it told with poetic flair, with delicate metaphors and lyrical restraint. But the truth, if such a thing exists in myth, is rarely delicate. Zeus, in his infinite divine boredom, wanted her, but not as himself. That would be too honest, too accountable. No, he descended in the form of a swan, white feathers, graceful neck, a symbol of purity and grace twisted into something invasive. Some say he seduced her. Others say he attacked. Some claim she lay with her husband on the same day. Twin pregnancies, twin consequences, Leda bore children, two mortal, two not. Helen cast her Pollux and Clytemnestra. Let's pause here, because while everyone talks about Helen's beauty and Clytemnestra's rage, no one really pauses to think about Leda, the woman caught in the middle of divine obsession and mortal responsibility. She disappears from her own story almost immediately, overshadowed by the daughters who burn brighter. But can you imagine what it feels like to be the origin of so much chaos and still be forgotten? Leda never asked for Zeus's gaze. She never sought the strange poetry of gods. She was simply chosen, and that, in Greek myth, is usually code for target. Historians still argue whether the myth of Leda reflects an older pre-Hellenic fertility rite or is simply another patriarchal metaphor for power. But either way, what survives isn't her agency, it's her consequences. You find her now standing by a riverbank. She's washing linen, not ceremonially, just practically. Her hands move with muscle memory knuckles, red from cold water. She looks up when you arrive, and her eyes are not angry, just tired. She nods once. You sit. The water flows silently between you, like time trying not to make a sound. She speaks not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to break the spell of mythology. I held 4 children in my body, she says, but only one gets remembered for her face. You want to ask about Helen? About what it was like to raise someone the world would mythologize? But Leda shakes her head. She was mine, she says, until she wasn't. You glance down. The linen in her hands is stained with something dark. You want to ask if it's wine or blood, but you don't, because either way, doesn't matter. The gods never came back to clean anything. Leda is part of a pattern now. A girl made visible, desired, then discarded, and made to hold the aftermath. You remember how she was described in older poems, radiant Leda, soft-armed favored, but no one ever said heard. No one asked if she wanted to carry daughters who would be turned into cautionary tales. The fringe scholars have a theory. They suggest Leda represents the cultural anxiety of mortal women being caught between divine will and earthly duty, that her swan encounter is metaphor. But Leda herself doesn't deal in metaphors. She deals in water too cold for comfort and linens that don't wash clean. She deals in names that aren't hers, echoed across songs that never credited the mother. You ask her if she misses the gods. She laughs just once. A dry, cracked sound, like brittle parchment snapping. They miss nothing, she says. That's why they get to be gods. You stay a little longer, not because you expect closure, but because no one ever sat with her this long before. Eventually, Leda stands. She wrings the water from the cloth. It drips red, or maybe not. Maybe that's just the dusk. She doesn't say goodbye. She just nods toward the horizon. And you know it's time to go. The river behind you forgets. But you won't. Leda never asked to shine. She was lit from the outside and burned from the inside. The price of beauty wasn't hers to pay, but she paid it anyway, and no one kept the receipt. The path changes now. Stone becomes sand. The wind picks up not harsh, just curious. You're approaching a wedding, but not the joyful kind. There's no music here, no laughter. Just a long table where the gods once gathered, and one goddess wasn't invited. Thetis. You might know her as the mother of Achilles, the sea nymph fated to bear a son greater than his father, a threat to divine egos everywhere. Zeus wanted her, Poseidon too, but the prophecy stopped them cold. So they did what powerful beings always do when they're scared they pass the burden down. They married her off to a mortal, Peleus, a man who didn't deserve her, didn't understand her, couldn't touch her true shape. But he won her, supposedly by ambush, or trickery, or divine arrangement. The myths don't agree on how, only that she resisted, only that she tried to flee changing form again and again, fire, lioness, water, wind. But even shape-shifting wasn't enough. They caught her and called it a wedding. The ceremony was grand. All the gods attended, all except one, Eris, the goddess of strife. She wasn't invited. Too chaotic, they said. Too messy. Too prone to ruin things. So she crashed the party and brought a gift, a golden apple, inscribed with 3 words to the fairest. That's it. That's the phrase that launched 1,000 deaths. The apple was thrown, and 3 goddesses laid claim to it. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite. Each certain they were the most beautiful, each unable to share. They turned to Zeus. He refused. Of course, even he wasn't foolish enough to get in the middle of that. So he passed the choice to Paris, a Trojan prince with soft curls and softer judgment. You've heard what happened next. Hera offered power. Athena offered wisdom. Aphrodite offered a woman. Helen, the most beautiful, already married, already doomed. Paris chose Aphrodite. He took the apple, and history followed. But let's rewind. Let's go back to the woman who never got a say. Thetis. She's rarely talked about. Not in the poems, not in the glory, but she was the beginning. Without her, no apple, no argument, no war. And yet she disappears after the wedding, reduced to a mother mourning her son. You find her now beneath the sea. It's quiet here, not silent, just muffled. The world sounds far away like an echo underwater. Thetis sits on a stone, her hair floating around her like kelp. She doesn't look at you. She's watching something in the distance. Maybe a memory. Maybe nothing. You wait. Eventually, she speaks. I was supposed to be a goddess. You nod. She continues. They made me a bride. She doesn't sound angry. She sounds hollow, like the part of her that burned was extinguished long ago. You want to ask about Peleus, but she waves a hand. That man, he caught my body, not me. She's not bitter. She's beyond bitterness. She's history that no longer apologizes. Historians still debate whether Thetis's myth was originally a tale of divine rebellion or just another excuse to explain why mortals ended up in bed with immortals. Fringe theories even suggest the apple story was retrofitted, added later to justify the Trojan War, with a touch of feminine vanity. But Thetis doesn't care about theories. She cares about silence. She cares about what it means to be powerful and then told to be grateful for being given away. You ask her if she loved Achilles. She nods. All I ever did was try to protect him. And she did. Dipped him in the Styx, hid him in skirts, begged Hephaestus for armor. But in the end, even a goddess couldn't outrun prophecy. Thetis learned what women in myth are often forced to accept, that no matter how powerful you are, you can still be treated like a favor, still be silenced, still be blamed for the wars men fight in your name. The golden apple might have said to the fairest, but it never said to the willing. Thetis finally turns to you. Her eyes are vast. Not cold, not warm, just deep. Like the sea that doesn't care whether you worship it or drown in it. You're wondering why I didn't fight harder, she says. You shake your head. I did. She answers anyway. I just lost. The sea moves around her, not crashing, not raging, just shifting. It accepts her because she is part of it, and she is done being understood by the surface. You leave her there, not because she needs to be left, but because you don't belong in the ocean, and she doesn't belong in the myths that forgot her. Above the waves, the world still calls her Mother of Achilles. But down here, she's just Thetis, the girl who never asked to marry, the goddess who never asked to shine. You climb back to land, and the breeze dries the salt on your skin. The air is warmer here, heavier, like it's been holding its breath for centuries. You step into a grove, olive trees twisting with old secrets, and you feel her before you see her. A presence in the roots, a weight in the leaves. Medusa. You flinch. Even now, even knowing better, her name flickers in your mind like a warning label. She's the one with snakes for hair, the one who turns men to stone, the one you're supposed to fear. But that's not where the story starts. Once Medusa was a girl, not a monster, not a myth, just a priestess, devoted to Athena, pure, vowed, sacred. She served in the goddess's temple, where mortals were meant to be safe from the whims of men and gods alike. But of course, that's not how things go in Olympus-adjacent stories. One day Poseidon saw her and wanted her, not loved, not courted, not even spoken to, just wanted. So he took her, in Athena's temple, on her altar. In some versions, Medusa was silent. In others, she screamed. In none of them does anyone stop Poseidon and Athena. She doesn't strike down the god. She punishes the girl, not the one who broke the vow, but the one who was broken upon it. She curses Medusa, not for betrayal, but for being betrayed. turns her hair to snakes, her gaze to stone, and locks her away from the world that no longer deserves her face. Historians still argue whether Athena's curse was a punishment or a twisted protection, giving Medusa the power to never be touched again. Fringe thinkers have wondered if the story was rewritten to make rape into scandal and woman into weapon. But Medusa, she doesn't speak in theories. She speaks in echoes. You find her now in a cave far from the stories. No statues here, no broken bodies, just her and the snakes. They're not hissing, they're sleeping, curled around her shoulders like tired questions. She looks up when you enter, and her eyes are not glowing, they're red. From crying, maybe, or just from seeing too much. You want to ask if it's true if she turns people to stone. She tilts her head. I only ever wanted them to stop looking. You sit. She watches you without blinking, and you realize her curse wasn't about violence. It was about boundaries, about never being made into an altar again. Do you miss who you were before you ask? She thinks, then shakes her head. I was beautiful, she says. They told me that every day. And every day I wished I wasn't. You understand now. The snakes weren't a punishment. They were a mirror. For every time someone thought her beauty was for them, now no one dares to desire her. Now she can finally rest. But rest doesn't mean peace, not when statues of her still stand in museums, frozen mid-scream, not when warriors like Perseus get statues for cutting off her head, and not when little girls are still taught that being feared is worse than being hurt. She traces a pattern in the dirt. It's a spiral. No beginning, no end. I didn't ask to shine, she says, but they wouldn't let me dim. You wonder what it's like to be made a monster because someone else couldn't handle their own reflection. You wonder what it's like to be safe only when terrifying. And you wonder, too, how many times Medusa has wished for silence only to be given legend. Fringe scholars have suggested that Medusa was once a pre-Greek goddess figure, absorbed into a male-dominated pantheon and vilified, that the snakes were once symbols of wisdom, not horror. Maybe they're right. Or maybe Medusa is simply what happens when a woman stops flinching. She closes her eyes, not to hide, but to rest. And you leave carefully, not afraid, but respectful, because you've just met someone who never wanted revenge, just quiet. Medusa was never the monster. She was the consequence of what happens when no one listens until you become unavoidable. You step out into the moonlight. The breeze moves again. And this time, it doesn't sting. Because for the first time in this long, myth-wrapped night, you're starting to see clearly. And you're not turning to stone. You're waking up. The air turns sharp again. Dry, pine-scented. You walk uphill this time, each step crunching over gravel and needles. The trees hush the world around you, and at the top of the hill you find the ruins of a temple, half-fallen columns, scattered marble slabs, and one pedestal with no statue. a space where someone used to stand, a woman whose name still echoes faintly when the wind comes from the right direction. Arachne. Maybe you've heard her story. Maybe you remember the thread, the loom, the boast. The girl who dared to challenge a goddess. But no one ever tells you why she did it, not properly. Not the part where it wasn't pride. It was grief and art and wanting someone, anyone, to notice what her fingers could create. You imagine her in a dusty corner of Lydia weaving patterns so perfect they looked alive, threads that shimmered like breath, scenes that didn't just tell stories, they preserved them. A girl with no noble blood, no divine parentage, just skill and hunger, and an audience she hoped would see her finally as something more than another quiet girl at a loom. Then came Athena, disguised as an old woman, first testing her, warning her, telling her to be humble, to give credit to the gods. But Arachne didn't lie. She said her talent was her own, and she didn't bow. So Athena revealed herself. They held a contest, each at her loom, each threading not just silk and wool, but memory and meaning. Athena wove stories of divine glory, the greatness of Olympus, the punishments of mortals who defied their place. But Arachne, she wove something else. Scenes of the gods at their worst. Zeus taking mortal girls without consent. Poseidon chasing unwilling nymphs. Apollo tricking maidens with golden lies. A whole tapestry of divine misbehavior, so vivid, so accurate, it stung. Historians still argue whether this story was a warning to artists or a fable about censorship. Fringe scholars believe Arachne's tale reflects an older tradition of mortal women as sacred storytellers, silenced by rising patriarchal cults. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: Athena didn't win. She destroyed the tapestry and Arachne. She tried to hang herself, in some versions out of shame, in others out of defiance. Athena stopped her not out of mercy, but because death would have been too easy. So she changed her into a spider, not just cursed, but reduced, made to spin forever, no longer praised, no longer seen, just feared. The wind moves through the broken stones as if remembering thread. You see her now, not the spider, not the monster, the girl sitting on a column-based legs, drawn up, fingers twitching, even in rest. She notices you, doesn't smile, doesn't scowl, just watches. Her voice is barely above the breeze. They said I challenged a goddess. You nod, but I didn't. She plucks a strand of invisible thread between two fingers. I just told the truth. You sit beside her, not too close. She smells like dust and lavender, like a memory left in an attic too long. You were brave, you whisper. She shrugs. I was clear. You ask if she misses weaving. She looks at her hands. I never stopped. And you notice tiny threads, impossibly fine between her fingers. Not silk, not webbing. Stories. Still spinning, still catching fragments of truth. the gods try to bury. I told their secrets, she says, so they made me small. She points to a rock, and you see it now, a perfect web stretched between two ruins, not chaotic, not wild, composed. A scene from Olympus, frozen mid-deceit, rendered in silk. You blink. She's already working on another. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She doesn't ask for revenge. She asks for space. To create. To name what others fear to speak. Arachne was never punished for her pride. She was punished for her honesty, for making beauty out of ugliness, and for refusing to be grateful for a gift the gods never gave her. She ties off the thread. It glows just briefly in the moonlight. You stand, not because she tells you to, but because it's clear she's not done spinning. And her story isn't done either. You look back once before, descending the hill. The pedestal is still empty. But now you wonder if that's how she wanted it. No statue, no worship, just her work. Seen. And that's more than most women in these myths ever get. The path grows thorny, literally. Scrub brush clings to your legs, little barbs tugging at your thoughts. The moon is lower now, less a spotlight, more a whisper. You follow the dry scent of rosemary and crushed sage down into a valley carved by wind and resentment. You hear bees somewhere far off and something deeper than that old grief humming in the ground like it never stopped vibrating. You're near Circe's island, or rather, the memory of it, because it's never the same place twice. Like her, they call her a witch, a temptress, a woman who turns men into pigs, but they never tell you why. They don't tell you what it cost her to live alone. They don't tell you about the silence she built into comfort. They don't tell you how long she waited before anyone washed up on her shores and didn't try to conquer her. Circe was a daughter of the sun, if you believe the older stories. Born to Helios, sister to Pasiphae, aunt to the Minotaur. Yes, really, the family tree is complicated. But Circe, she wasn't gifted with monstrous strength or queenly power. She was born soft, overlooked. She spoke to herbs, to wind, to the quiet sigh of animals that trusted her before humans ever did. She learned slow magic, not thunderbolt magic, not prophecy magic, craft, brewing, binding, undoing. Historians still debate whether Circe was part of an older matriarchal magic tradition, later demonized by the rise of heroic epics. Fringe thinkers suggest her island was once a real sanctuary for women fleeing male violence, explaining why so many heroes ended up cursed there. You reach a cliff overlooking an invisible ocean. The tide isn't audible, but the pull is. And sitting at the edge is a figure stirring something in a bronze bowl. You recognize her before she turns. Circe. No snakes, no horns, just hair like smoke, eyes like bruised olives. Calm. Watching, you sit near her, but not too close. Do you think I hated men? She asks, unprompted. You hesitate. She smirks. I didn't. I hated what they assumed. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. When Odysseus came, I expected the usual. She stirs once. He was clever. Thought himself above it all. But cleverness is just pride dressed as wit. You ask why she turned his men into pigs. She tilts her head. Because they behaved like pigs. Simple, not cruel, not unjust. Just accurate. And what did Odysseus do, you ask? She laughs, soft like a pot about to boil. He played nice, pretended not to be afraid, then begged me to turn them back. Did you? Of course. You blink. She shrugs. They weren't dangerous once they knew they could be changed. The moonlight catches her bowl. You see herbs you don't recognize, powdered roots, a feather, something that looks like regret. Magic, she says, isn't about power. It's about choice. She taps the rim of the bowl. And no one ever liked that I had some. The island, her island, wasn't a trap. It was a boundary, a place where women could choose what stayed and what didn't. Circe wasn't exiled. She left. She looked at Olympus and said, "No, thank you." And they called her dangerous for it. You ask if she was lonely. She exhales, only when the wind stopped talking. The trees rustle on cue. Circe stands, not towering, not dramatic, just sure. She offers you a cup. The brew smells like honey and pine. You sip. Nothing changes, except you feel heavier and lighter, like truth is finally resting where it belongs. Was it worth it, you ask? She nods. To be called a witch rather than be owned. Yes, you sit with her a while longer. She speaks to the herbs again, not in words, just presence. And you understand maybe for the first time that some women didn't want to be seen. They wanted to be left alone. Circe didn't punish. She protected. Not herself from loneliness, from pain, from betrayal, but others, from forgetting their own power. The sea crashes far below now, not angry, not calm, just honest. You leave her as you found her, stirring something ancient, not for you, for herself. Circe was never a villain. She was just a woman who learned how to live without permission. The path winds downward again, but slower this time, softer. You're walking through warm dust, your feet kicking up the same color as baked bread crust. The sun is just a suggestion now, dipping behind imagined hills, and the stars haven't quite claimed the sky. You pass fig trees, cisterns, a half-buried amphora with no story left to carry. Then you smell sulfur and ash and the faint sting of something not entirely natural. You're near the shadow of a volcano, and you know who waits here. Scylla. Yes, that's Scylla, the sea monster, the one with 6 heads, 12 legs, barking voices, and an appetite for sailors. You've heard the Odyssey version, the cliff-dwelling horror who snatches men out of boats like olives from a jar, the thing even Odysseus can't fight, only avoid. But the version they don't tell you, she wasn't born that way. She was made, and as usual by love, or what passed for it in Greek mythology. Before the transformation, Scylla was a sea nymph, not just any nymph, a beautiful one. That word again, that curse. She lived near the shore, never too deep, never too far from the cliffs. She liked the echo of her own laughter against stone, liked the way the fish ignored her, like she was part of the sea itself. And then Glaucus came, a mortal fisherman turned sea god, because apparently anyone who eats enough magic seaweed can join the divine payroll. He saw her, loved her, wanted her, and she said no, not cruelly, not dramatically, just no. She liked her solitude, her rocks, her space. So he went to someone else for help, Circe. Yes, her again, because in Greek myth, all lonely women know each other. Glaucus begged Circe for a potion, something to make Scylla fall in love with him. But Circe, she wasn't interested in matchmaking. She was interested in him. And when he refused her, chose Scylla instead, well, you see where this is going. Circe didn't just curse Scylla out of jealousy. She cursed her because she could. Because in a world where love means power, saying no is a punishable offense. So she poured poison into the water where Scylla bathed. And Scylla screamed, fell, changed. Her legs twisted into dogs, heads sprouted from her waist. Her voice fractured into howls, not graceful, not tragic, grotesque, unbearable, unlovable. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor for female rage or just another way to silence beauty that doesn't reciprocate. Fringe scholars note that in older local myths, Scylla was a cliff goddess, a protector of the sea cliffs, later turned into a threat by male seafarers. You reach the edge of her cave. It's less monstrous than you expected. Dark, yes, but not violent. There's moss growing at the lip, shells arranged in a pattern only she understands. Inside, you hear movement, a slither, a breath, a whimper. She's there, and she's not six-headed tonight. She's just a woman, taller than you expect, hair like wet rope, eyes that flash like tide pools at dusk. She doesn't growl, she doesn't smile either. She just looks at you, and her voice, when it comes, is cracked around the edges. Do you know how many stories they told about me? You nod. She gestures toward the sea. None of them start before the poison. She sits cross-legged, letting her fingers trace the dirt. I was happy, she says. Not important, just okay. And they hated that. You don't say anything. What is there to say? She speaks again. They say I attacked ships. Did you? She doesn't answer, just picks up a stone and tosses it toward the cave wall. Do you know what it feels like to have pieces of yourself trying to devour what you once loved? You shake your head. She doesn't expect you to understand. She expects you to hear. The sea churns outside, waves smacking rock. not because of her, because the tide is rising. Scylla watches it without blinking. They punished me for saying no. Then they punished me again for surviving it. You ask if she ever tried to leave. She laughs. I am the cliff now. And she's right. The curse wasn't just physical. It was geographical. She became part of the landscape, impossible to escape and impossible to ignore. But here's the twist. They never wrote down. Scylla doesn't hate the sailors. She pities them because they never knew her before. Before the poison, before the distortion, before the myth. You leave her as she is, not a monster, not a maiden, just someone who lost her shape because someone else couldn't take rejection. And as you walk back up the slope, you whisper her name, not in fear, but in apology. She hears you, but she doesn't reply, because some echoes belong to the sea now, and she's learned that silence bites louder than any teeth. You descend again into a forest this time. Thick-barked trees cluster like sentinels, branches arching overhead like ribs of some long-dead creature. The leaves rustle, but not from wind, from memory. This forest has seen too much, and as you step over a fallen log, moss sticking to your boots like secrets, the air grows warmer, thicker. You've reached the edge of Artemis's domain, and waiting in the shadows is a name less known, Callisto. Maybe you've never heard it. Maybe you thought the stars just randomly arranged themselves into the Great Bear. But Callisto was once human, a huntress, a follower of Artemis, sworn to chastity, sworn to freedom, sworn, in short, to herself. And then Zeus came. Because of course he did. This time not as himself, but as Artemis. Yes, he disguised himself as the very goddess Callisto trusted, and then he took what wasn't offered. She didn't scream, not right away, but she changed, inside, the kind of change that makes your body no longer feel like home. Weeks later, Artemis noticed the swelling of her belly, and Callisto's silence, and the truth behind it. But Artemis didn't comfort her. She exiled her, betrayed by a god, then abandoned by a goddess. Historians still argue whether Artemis knew the truth. Some say she did and chose her vow over her friend. Others suggest she was blinded by rage, trained from divine birth to view any trace of intimacy as defilement. Fringe scholars posit that Artemis's entire cult functioned as a haven for women resisting traditional roles, and Callisto's fate was a warning: don't get close to anyone, not even each other. You find a clearing, and there's a bear, huge, silent, sitting on its haunches like it remembers what it used to be. And then it speaks. Not in growls, in words. Do you think I asked for this? You shake your head. Callisto, still bear-shaped, still exiled, regards you through amber eyes. I wanted to run through the trees forever. She paws the ground. I wanted to belong. But you did, you say. She snorts Not after he came, not after I was changed. The bare skin twitches. She doesn't cry, just trembles. I was punished for being found. You sit down across from her. The moss is damp, your skin prickles. I didn't even want revenge, she says. I just wanted my name back. Because they took that too. They made her a constellation. Ursa Major, the Great Bear, forever visible, forever cold. A shape in the sky, stripped of the story. Just a symbol, not a voice. You ask her if she ever looks up at herself. She chuckles, low bitter. I see nothing but stars, pretending they're me. The forest thickens behind her. A cub appears, hesitant. Callisto watches it protective, but distant. That's her son Arcus, also turned into a bear by Zeus for almost killing her, not knowing what she'd become. You ask if she forgives him. She looks at the cub. I never blamed him. She blames the gods, all of them, for making love a battlefield, for making the body political, for turning motherhood into punishment. You sit quietly. She doesn't ask for comfort, just recognition. You give her that. And when she stands towering slow, she doesn't growl. She nods. Because maybe, for the first time in centuries, someone listened. You rise too. The leaves hush. Callisto vanishes between the trunks, her heavy footfalls fading like the end of a heartbeat. You leave the clearing, and above you, the stars glitter, unmoving, but not silent anymore. They say no one remembers the victims, but tonight you do, and the sky does too. The ground grows uneven now. Pebbles shift beneath your feet. The scent of metal clings to the air, not blood, but iron cold and sharp. You're nearing a battlefield, though no armies remain. Only the echo of vows broken, and one voice that keeps whispering her name through time. Medusa. Yes, her. Again, again. Because no matter how often they tell her story, they always start in the wrong place. With her hair, with her stare, with the stone. But they never begin with her body. Not before the snakes, not before Poseidon, not before the temple. You find her in a ruin, a half-collapsed hall, marble chipped, vines sneaking through cracks like gossip. She stands facing away, her hair still and black, not hissing, not wild, just waiting. Medusa wasn't always a monster. She was once a maiden of Athena's temple, devoted, pure, believing the gods protected those who served them. But Poseidon didn't care. He saw her beauty. He wanted it. So he took it, right there, in Athena's own temple. And what did the goddess do? She didn't curse the god. She cursed the girl, transformed her, twisted her beauty into terror, not to protect her, but to erase her. Historians still debate Athena's motives. Some say she punished Medusa for desecrating her sanctuary. Others claim she gave her the power to defend herself in a world where even goddesses couldn't stop male desire. Fringe theorists whisper that Medusa was meant to be a weapon all along, a mythic deterrent against seeing too much. You call her name. She turns slowly. No fangs, no snarling serpents, just eyes tired of being looked at. Medusa studies you. You expected me to scream, she asks. You shake your head. She laughs, dry and cracked. Everyone does, until they realize I've had nothing left to scream about for centuries. You step closer. Did it hurt, you ask? Her face hardens. Not the change, then softer. The betrayal. She brushes one hand across a broken column. I served a goddess. I believed in order, in justice. Her voice falters, and all I got was silence. You ask about the statues. Were they victims? Did she mean to kill them? She shrugs. Some tried to kill me first. Some just looked too long. She sits on the base of the column. The curse wasn't the stare. It was the visibility. To be seen only as a warning, never a person. She plucks a snake from her head. It nuzzles her finger like a pet. I name them, you know. You blink. She smiles. This one's Thistle. The snake flicks its tongue, indifferent to your disbelief. People forget, she says, that I didn't stop being human just because they stopped treating me like one. You ask if she ever wanted revenge. Her gaze narrows. Once. She pauses. Then I realized what I wanted more was to be forgotten. Because being remembered for your pain is not the same as being remembered for who you were. You sit beside her. The marble is cool. The night presses in. She doesn't ask you to stay. She just lets you. And maybe that's enough. You listen to her name echo off the columns, not in fear, but in reverence. Medusa. Not a monster, not a villain. Just a woman left behind by gods who refused to look inward, and who instead turned her into a mirror they could blame. The trail you follow now is narrow winding between jagged hills and dusty silence. You feel watched, but not by eyes, by expectation, by history, by the weight of stories that never asked the woman what she wanted. The wind brings the scent of sweat horses and something metallic, maybe bronze, maybe ambition. You are entering a race, not just any race, the chariot race. And she is waiting at the finish line. Her name is Hippodamia. You've probably heard the tale, just not with her voice in it. She was the prize, the daughter of King Wenamaus, the girl no man could win unless he beat her father in a chariot race. And no one did, because the king didn't just race. He murdered every suitor who failed. He nailed their heads to the palace gate like grim bragging flowers. Hippodamia saw every one. She wasn't just watching. She was counting. She knew the order of each skull, knew their names, knew how long they screamed. And then came Pelops. Beautiful, golden, calculating. He didn't race for love. He raced for a throne. But first, he asked for her help, and she gave it. Why? Because she was tired. Because she was smart. Because she wanted out. So she betrayed her father, Together they bribed the royal charioteer Myrtilus. They tampered with the chariot's axle. Oinomaus died screaming this time, not a suitor, but the source of all the bloodshed. And Hippodamia, she was free. Or so she thought. Pelops didn't marry her out of gratitude. He married her to complete the prize. And when Myrtilus asked for his reward, Pelops threw him into the sea. Historians still argue who orchestrated that betrayal. Was it Pelops alone, or did Hippodamia suggest it to keep Myrtilus quiet? Some even claim she loved the charioteer and watched him die to keep her new kingdom. Fringe theorists suggest the axle sabotage was her plan from the start. Regardless, she became queen, but not safe, not happy, just married. She bore children, and they tore each other apart, literally. You might have heard of Atreus and Thyestes. Their feud turned into a family curse, the kind that fed on sons and grandsons for generations. Blood soaked through her legacy like wine on white linen. You find her in a courtyard, empty, silent. She's older now. Still, her hands rest in her lap. A silver thread trails from her fingers. She's weaving, not cloth, not tapestry, something invisible, a pattern no one else can read. You call her name. She looks up. Do they tell my part? You shake your head. She nods. I didn't think so. Her voice is soft like a lullaby gone bitter. I gave them freedom, she says, and they gave me silence. You sit beside her. She doesn't look at you, just keeps weaving. They always forget the cost. You ask what she wanted. She finally turns to you. I wanted to stop watching men die because of me. And did you? She laughs, quiet, sharp. No, I just changed why they died. She lifts the silver thread, holds it to the light. Power stains everything she says, even victory. You ask if she'd do it again, if she'd betray her father. She closes her eyes, not in regret, in memory. I would, she says, but I'd ask for more. You leave her there, not triumphant, not shattered, just aware that sometimes surviving the race is not the end. It's just the start of another, and the finish line. It moves, always. The dust beneath your feet turns to soft clay, and the path curves toward a garden that no longer blooms. Vines crawl over broken columns. Rose bushes left untended now coil around thorns instead of blossoms. You hear bees, but they sound tired, the kind of buzzing that comes from too many seasons spent carrying pollen that no one wants anymore. And there she is, standing by a reflecting pool, staring down at her face, not admiring, not mourning, just watching. Helen, not of Troy, not the face that launched 1,000 ships, just Helen. And she's exhausted. You already know the legend, right? She was so beautiful that men waged war for her, left wives and children, burned cities, let thousands die, all because of her. Except, of course, that's not what happened. Not really. Helen was married to Menelaus, a Spartan king, because That's what kings did with beautiful women. They claimed them. She was never asked. She was never free. And then came Paris. You picture a love story, right? But there are versions, quieter ones, older ones, where Helen never went to Troy at all. Where Zeus, or maybe Apollo, made a phantom of her out of clouds and light and sent that to Troy, while the real Helen sat hidden in Egypt, waiting for the war to burn itself out. Historians still argue which version came first. Was Helen a traitor, a victim, a mirage? Some fringe scholars even believe her story was rewritten entirely by later poets to cleanse the gods of guilt and pin the war on a woman. You call to her gently. She turns. And this time, yes, she's breathtaking, but not in the way poets described. Not the lips or the eyes or the hair like woven gold. It's the weariness that strikes you, the beauty of someone who's been blamed for too many things she never chose. Helen doesn't greet you. She just speaks. Do you know what it's like to be spoken of? More than you ever got to speak? You nod, because you think you do now. She kneels beside the water. I've been a symbol longer than I was ever a girl. She picks up a pebble and tosses it in. Ripples, distortion, just like her memory. They say I left willingly. She looks at you. What would you do if every man you knew saw you not as a person, but a reason you say nothing? She answers for you. You'd run too. Then she laughs. A small, dry sound. Or maybe I didn't. Maybe I was taken. She shrugs. Even I don't know anymore. That's the curse you see, not the beauty, the forgetting. You sit beside her. She offers you a second pebble. You drop it in. The ripples intersect. Menelaus killed my maids, she says. All of them. For being near me, for hearing my side. She doesn't cry. She's done crying. They called me the cause of the war, but I never held a sword. She runs a finger over the surface of the pool. I never lit a torch. I never sailed a ship. I never asked for anyone to die. She looks at you again. But they did. And she's tired of carrying it. I wonder, she murmurs, if they would have fought so hard to rescue me if I'd been plain. You don't answer. You both know the truth. She stands, brushes the dust from her knees. I used to hate my reflection, she says, but now I just don't believe in it. Helen of Troy, the ghost of a woman invented by bards and blamed by kings, now walking through a garden where roses no longer bloom. I want a name without a war behind it, she says. You say her name once, softly. Just Helen. She pauses, smiles, and for a moment she believes you. Then she turns and walks through the thorns uncut. You watch her disappear, and for the first time you understand beauty isn't power. Not when the world only sees it as permission. You walk now into shade cooler, deeper than the rest. Not night, but something close. The kind of twilight that clings to mountains and myths, where voices echo even when no one speaks. Stones litter the path, smooth and round, as if shaped by centuries of tears. You reach a cave entrance, small but yawning, like it leads to something ancient and unkind. This is the place they left her. This is the silence after the oracle. This is the world of Cassandra. Yes, that Cassandra. The girl who said everything right and was never believed. You duck into the cave. The air is dry, smells like parchment and ash. And there she is, sitting cross-legged on a flat rock, scratching lines into the dirt with a stick. Her hair hangs limp. Her eyes are wide but tired, not mad, not wild, just done. Cassandra was the daughter of Priam, king of Troy, a princess, if that ever mattered. Apollo saw her and offered a gift, the ability to see the future. She accepted, then refused his love. So he cursed her gift, let her see truth, but made sure no one ever believed her again. Historians still debate the moral here. Was Cassandra punished for saying no, or for knowing too much? Some say she's a warning about women with voices. Fringe scholars argue her curse was a metaphor for trauma. How those who survive disaster are often dismissed when they try to warn others. You greet her softly. She doesn't look up. "Don't bother," she says. "You won't believe me anyway." You assure her you will. She snorts. They all say that. Then I speak. She draws a symbol in the dirt, a spiral turning inward. That's what the future feels like. Not a line, a loop. You ask if it hurts. Only when I hope. She finally looks at you. There were so many chances, she says. So many warnings. She told the Trojans about the Greeks, about the horse, about the fire. No one listened. Not her father, not her brothers, not even Hector. She picks up a stone and tosses it into the cave wall. You'd think after the first 20 prophecies came true, they'd start paying attention. She laughs a jagged thing. But they didn't want truth. They wanted comfort. You sit with her. The rock is cold. The cave hums with old echoes. She leans back. "I screamed myself hoarse," she says, "and they called me mad. They said I was hysterical, possessed, cursed." She closes her eyes. And the whole time I was right. You ask about the fall of Troy, if she saw it clearly. She nods. "I saw the fire eating the sky. I saw the blood running down temple steps. I saw myself dragged by my hair into another man's palace." Because that's what came next. After Troy fell, Cassandra was claimed by Agamemnon. Not rescued, not freed. Claimed, and then murdered by his wife. Because one woman's rage met another woman's silence. You ask if she saw that too. She nods. "I saw everything," she says, "even the parts I couldn't stop." She stands slowly, dusts off her robe. "I stopped trying to change the future a long time ago." She looks at the spiral again. "Now I just tell the rocks. They listen better than people." You follow her gaze, and in the cave wall, etched faintly into the stone, are names. Hundreds of names. People she tried to save. You trace one with your finger. She watches. They were real, she says. Not just numbers. Not just verses in someone else's song. You turn to her. What do you want now? She tilts her head. To be wrong. She smiles for the first time. Just once. But even now, she knows she won't be. You walk back into the light. The cave doesn't echo when you leave, because sometimes truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits and waits until someone finally hears it. You step out of the cave, blinking under the pale sun, and the landscape changes again. It's flatter here, the air carrying a hint of ash and salt. A wide plain stretches out before you, studded with burnt-out torches and broken spears half buried in sand. You smell scorched grass and the old echo of cheering crowds, like applause, fossilized in time. And in the distance, rising from the dust, like a statue, forgotten by everyone but herself, stands a woman, cloaked in gray. Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, the last warrior to fall at Troy. You approach slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. She stands still, her spear planted beside her like a grave marker. Her armor is battered, her hair wind-blown, and her eyes fixed on something you can't see. Maybe the horizon, maybe the past. The Amazons were real, or at least partially real. Historians still debate how much of their legend is rooted in truth. Some believe they were based on Scythian warrior women. Others say they were entirely myth, created to reflect Greek anxieties about women who didn't need men. Fringe scholars even argue the Amazons were a metaphor for what Greek society feared most: women who refused the domestic sphere. Penthesilea's story, though, is tangled even by mythological standards. She came to Troy late after Hector had fallen. Some say she sought redemption for accidentally killing her own sister in a hunting accident. Others claim she came to prove that not only men could fight with honor, but whatever her reason, she joined the war and died swiftly, killed by Achilles, but not cleanly, not honorably, because after he struck her down, Achilles did something the myths can't quite agree on. He fell in love with her as she died. Historians whisper about it in footnotes. Some call it necrophilia, others poetic guilt, but all agree it was strange. You reach her now. She doesn't turn. She knows you're there. I don't want to talk about him, she says. You nod. You weren't going to ask. She finally looks at you, and her eyes are not angry. They are disappointed. Do you know what it feels like, she says, to be remembered only for the man who killed you? You shake your head. She nods as if expecting that. I led an army. I crossed continents. I bled for honor. And all they see is a footnote in his story. You ask why she came. Because war is not just for men, she says. Because grief doesn't care what gender you are. Because I needed to do something. She lifts her spear. It's cracked. but still sharp. I trained my whole life to die well, she says, and then my death became a joke. You sit beside her in the dust. She doesn't move, but the air around her hums with tension, like lightning, just beneath the skin of the earth. You ask if she regrets it. Penthesilea doesn't answer right away. She kneels, draws a line in the sand, then another, then another. A battlefield mapped from memory. Regret is a luxury, she says. Men get to die with regret. Women have to die with narrative. She throws a pebble onto the sketch. Achilles cried, she says. They made sure to write that down. You ask if it meant anything. No, she says. He cried for himself. She draws a circle. My sisters died beside me. Not one name remembered. You look at the battlefield she's drawn. It's beautiful and terrible and vanishing in the breeze. I didn't come to be admired, she says. I came to be understood. You whisper her name, not as a warrior, not as a myth, as a woman, Penthesilea, and something in her shifts, not softens, but deepens. She stands, taller now. Tell them, she says, tell them I wasn't just a body with a spear. And then she walks into the plain. No army behind her, no legend ahead, just a woman reclaiming the silence. The landscape warps again, not violently, but with the slow, eerie ease of memory folding into dream. You follow the echo of footsteps on marble, the faint scent of olive oil and candle wax, trailing ahead like an invisible guide. The city around you is still too still. No laughter from courtyards, no song from windows, just the hush of reverence, or maybe fear. This is Athens, but not the part you'd want to visit. And she's waiting inside the temple, not on the altar, not behind it. She's sweeping. She holds the broom like a weapon, though, and her eyes are bright with something too sharp to be sadness. You've found Medusa, not the snake-haired monster, not the petrifying villain, the girl, before the transformation, before the curse, before the branding. Medusa was once a priestess in Athena's temple, a vow of chastity, a life of service, a heart full of faith. And then Poseidon saw her and claimed her, there in the sacred space. No altar could stop him. You don't ask what happened next. You already know. But here's the twist, the part that keeps historians up at night redrawing timelines and muttering at their footnotes. Athena, instead of punishing the god, punished Medusa. She turned her into a gorgon, a creature so feared that one look would kill. Not just exile, not just shame, but a body twisted into a warning sign. Historians still argue why. Was it divine cruelty? Was it mercy? A gift of protection disguised as punishment? Some fringe scholars say Athena gave Medusa power in the only form the world would leave her alone. Medusa looks at you now. No snakes, just tired hair pinned back with a ribbon that might have once been ceremonial. You expected the monster, she says. You nod sheepishly. She smiles briefly. Sadly. So did I. You ask what she remembers. She brushes marble dust from a column. I remember saying, "No," she says. I remember no one listening. She sweeps again, slow and steady. I was supposed to be safe here, she says, and that word lingers like incense. She walks toward the altar. It's cracked. Dark stains crawl along its base, oil or blood or something older. They said I tempted him, she says. They always say that. She taps the stone with her broom. I cleaned this place for 3 years, and in one moment they made me filth. You ask about the snakes. She exhales. They came later, she says. Not all at once. A pause. A little more every time I was blamed. She sits now back against the altar. They weren't punishment, she says. They were armor. You imagine her coiled in rage, eyes blazing venom, curling down her cheeks, like tears turned lethal. She sees your thought. You think I enjoyed it. She shakes her head. I hated what I became, but I hated being powerless more. You ask about the statues, those turned to stone. She closes her eyes. Some deserved it. Then softly, some didn't. You sit beside her. The temple is silent. She plucks a small olive branch from a cracked bowl, twirls it between her fingers. I never asked to be a symbol, she says. But once they make you one, she holds up the branch. They never let you be human again. You ask if she would undo it, if she could. The transformation, the fear, the story. Medusa looks out the temple window, where the sky is beginning to bruise with twilight. I don't know, she says. A pause. Maybe I just want a name that wasn't whispered. You rise. She stays seated. The dust settles again, soft and indifferent. And as you step away, you think about every story you heard as a child, and how none of them told you she was trying to pray when it all went wrong. You leave the temple behind its broken columns, shrinking in the distance like teeth in a cracked jaw. The air thickens. It's not smoke. It's not mist. It's memory, again rising, like heat from pavement. You pass into a wooded area, now low oaks and dry grass underfoot. There's no breeze, just stillness. Stillness and the soft crunch of leaves as you step toward a clearing where a single figure waits by a pool. She doesn't stand like a goddess, or a monster, or even a queen. She just stands like someone who's run out of places to go. Her dress is threadbare. Her hair is tangled. Her hands tremble, but not from weakness, from holding in too much for too long. This is Arachne, and the loom beside her is half covered with dust. You've heard of her, maybe. The weaver who challenged Athena, the girl who boasted she was better with thread than a goddess, a mortal whose pride got her transformed into a spider. That's the headline version. The real story, more complicated, more uncomfortable, more familiar. Arachne was a young woman from Lydia, gifted with her hands and eyes, and a sense of balance that could stitch the world together one thread at a time. Her tapestries weren't just beautiful, they were true. And that's where her trouble began. Because she wove stories the gods didn't like, not myths, truths about Zeus, about his conquests, his disguises, his victims. She didn't lie. She just didn't flinch. And when Athena came to see her work disguised as an old woman to give her a chance to recant, Arachne didn't budge. She didn't grovel, didn't apologize, just kept weaving. Historians still argue what Athena saw in that moment. Was it disrespect? Honesty a mirror? Some fringe scholars even suggest Arachne's punishment wasn't transformation, but survival, a forced witness to the hypocrisy of the divine. You greet her quietly. She flinches, but doesn't run. "I don't bite," she says, "not anymore." You sit on the stone beside her loom. The thread is frayed but beautiful. It gleams like starlight in the shade. "Do you still weave?" you ask. She nods, barely, "when I can." She picks up the shuttle and passes it through once. "I used to believe art could change the world." A faint smile. "Turns out it just made me a target." You ask if she regrets speaking through her tapestries. "No," she says, "but I regret being right." She gestures at the broken threads. "They didn't like what I showed them." She leans closer, whispering, "But they couldn't unsee it. The gods tore her tapestry apart, and then they turned her into the thing they thought fit her best. Not just a spider, a spinner, endlessly weaving, endlessly watching, endlessly alone." She touches her own wrist, where a faint spiral scar winds across the skin. "Spiders don't forget," she says. "You can squash them, burn them. But there's always one more web." You ask if she ever stopped weaving. She nods toward a cloth folded nearby. You unfold it slowly. It's not a god this time, not a punishment. It's a woman, eyes open, mouth closed, surrounded by threads made of stories. And all around her are voices, woven into the background like whispers. She speaks. She lies. She's dangerous. She's gone. You realize it's not just Arachne's story. It's all of them. Helen, Cassandra, Medusa, Penthesilea, and more you haven't met. You look up. Her fingers are already moving again. Not fast, not panicked, just steady, as if weaving is the only way left to breathe. "What do you want them to remember?" you ask. She stops. The loom creaks. "I want them to look," she says. You fold the cloth carefully and place it back beside her. She nods. And just before you stand, you hear her whisper, "One last thing. Every thread is true, even the ones the gods try to pull out. The trees thin out behind you, giving way to open, sun-scorched ground." It's quiet again, but not the same quiet you've been walking through all night. This quiet feels institutional. You can almost hear the echo of sandals on polished stone, the clatter of bronze doors shutting behind whispers and decrees. In the distance stands a grand house, too orderly to be holy, too official to be safe. A school, a shrine, a sentence. You step inside, and the air sharpens. Scrolls line the walls, coiled like sleeping snakes. Every breath you take smells of ink and old wax. At the center, standing at a table scattered with tablets, is a woman cloaked in dusty red. She's older than the others you've met, not in years, though perhaps that too, but in posture, in patience. In the slow, measured way her hand moves across clay. This is Theano, wife of Pythagoras. But that's not the whole truth. She was a philosopher in her own right, a mathematician, a teacher. Her writings on virtue, on the golden mean, on cosmology, they shaped minds. But her legacy, mostly buried under the shadow of a man whose name became the theorem, while hers became a footnote. Historians still argue about the details of her life. Was she a student, a spouse, a scholar? Did she lead the school after Pythagoras' death? Or was that a later invention to romanticize her intellect? Fringe scholars say her manuscripts were stripped of her name, redistributed under male authors, erased like chalk from a slate. She notices you, doesn't smile, doesn't frown either, just gestures for you to sit. You do. She continues writing. The stylus moves like a needle, stitching across time. After a long moment, she speaks. Do you know how many things were mine? You shake your head. She taps the tablet. And how many now have someone else's name? You don't answer. She looks up. Her eyes are clear, sharp. I taught geometry to children, she says. I mapped the structure of thought. She lifts a second tablet. And they said I was helping, as if her ideas were merely scaffolding. Support beams in a building never credited to her. You ask what she wrote about. She hands you a wax tablet. It reads, Silence does not equal ignorance. Then another, Names are not always truths. Then one more virtue exists in remembering what others forget. You run your fingers over the inscriptions. The wax is cool, solid, but the words feel like fire. You ask if she misses being remembered properly. She raises an eyebrow. I am not forgotten, she says, and it's true in this moment. You're here, you're listening. She continues, They say I was devoted, faithful, supportive. She pauses. No one asks what I believed. You do. She smiles faintly and gestures to a small shelf behind her. You walk over, scrolls labeled not in Greek, but in symbols, numbers, ratios, golden spirals. You unroll one. It's filled with diagrams of proportions, symmetry in nature, formulas, reflections, more beautiful than you expected, like poetry without words. They called it mystical, she says, but it was always just observation. You sit again. Theano leans back, finally resting her hands. You know what the hardest part is? You shake your head. She closes her eyes, knowing the truth will outlive you, but not your name. Silence. Then softer, unless someone writes it down again. You glance at the tablet she was working on when you arrived. It bears a single phrase. Light, when seen, is not forgotten. You thank her. She nods once, and without ceremony, without goodbye, returns to her stylus. The scratching resumes. The record continues. And for the first time all night you feel not haunted, but anchored. Like maybe even in erasure, a truth can endure if someone chooses to look for it. The wax and clay scent of Theano's study fades behind you as you step back into the open, your thoughts now heavy with geometry and grief. The sky above has shifted, no longer pale or violet, but a hazy bronze, as if time itself has grown tired. Dust clings to your sandals. The ground beneath you is cracked and silent. You don't know exactly where you're going, but you feel the next story tugging at you like thread between fingers. Eventually, you arrive at a coastal bluff. The ocean yawns wide below waves, lapping quietly at jagged rocks. The air here is filled with salt and stillness. And on the edge of the cliff, wrapped in a deep blue cloak, sits a woman watching the horizon. Her hair is cropped short, her shoulders tense, her hands clutching a folded piece of parchment that flutters in the wind like it's trying to escape. You already know her name. Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinoos, savior of Odysseus, and the one he left behind. Her myth is often glazed over, just a stepping stone on Odysseus's long, long road back to Ithaca. A helpful princess, a kind girl, a plot device with a smile. But Nausicaa's story is quieter than that, and much sadder. She found Odysseus washed up on the shore, naked, hungry, broken. She gave him food, clothing, shelter, protection. Her family welcomed him. She dreamed, perhaps, of more. And then he left. Just like that. For Penelope. For destiny. For narrative. Historians still argue whether her tale was meant to be romantic, tragic, or merely transitional. Some fringe scholars say Homer used her as an echo of what Penelope once was, young, hopeful, unscarred. Others argue Nausicaa was a stand-in for readers destined to fall in love with a story they could never keep. She hears you approach and speaks before you can. I know, she says, you're not him. You sit beside her. The parchment in her hands has been folded too many times. The edges are soft. The ink faded. What is it, you ask? A list, she says. Of what? She opens it. The words are blurry, but you make out fragments. What I should have said. What I should have known. What I should have been. You look at her, she shrugs. They always say I was kind. A pause. No one says I was angry. You ask if she wanted him to stay. She laughs, once sharp, not cruel. I wanted to matter, she says. He thanked me, praised me, promised to remember me. She looks down at the parchment again. And then he sailed away like I was a chapter that ended. She tears the parchment in half. I saved him, she says. And he never asked if I needed saving too. The waves below crash harder now, as if the ocean is remembering its own losses. You ask if she regrets helping him. She doesn't answer right away. Then softly, no. A longer pause, but I regret believing it meant something. She picks up a small seashell, turns it in her fingers. Do you know what it's like, she says, to be the right person in the wrong story? You do. Or at least you think you do. The horizon burns orange now, and Nausicaa watches it with a kind of exhausted hope. He left, she says, and everyone wrote about him. She tosses the shell into the wind. Not one poem for me. She stands, brushes sand from her cloak, and without looking back, begins to walk up the hill toward the forest you came from. Not running, not fleeing, just done waiting. You remain at the cliff's edge, the wind tugging gently at your sleeves. And in the quiet, you wonder how many others were left behind, not because they failed, but because the story didn't have room for them. You rise slowly from the cliff's edge, wind still brushing against your back like an unfinished sentence. The path ahead narrows into stone, not carved, not built, just worn by centuries of barefooted souls, most of whom were likely women, and most of whom the poets never named. The sun has dipped low now, not quite setting, just dragging its feet across the horizon. The sky turns dusky, rose the color of tired parchment. You walk through tall reeds and faded laurel, the silence only interrupted by the soft murmur of insects and some far-off dog barking at a shadow it can't quite chase. Ahead, built halfway into the side of a rocky hill, is a humble doorway, not a palace, not a shrine, a cottage, the kind of place where forgotten people end up, or maybe start again. Inside, she's waiting, but not for you. She's seated at a table staring at a bowl of figs like they've said something insulting. Her hands are calloused, her arms strong, her face not youthful, not old, just real, sharp cheekbones, sun-worn skin eyes like those of someone who used to believe in prophecy and now only believes in quiet. This is Iphigenia, yes, that Iphigenia, the daughter Agamemnon led to slaughter so he could get favorable winds to sail for Troy, the girl sacrificed for a war she had no voice in, a virgin offering, a martyr, a footnote, except the story isn't quite that clean. Some versions say Artemis saved her at the last moment, whisked her away to a temple in Taurus, where she became a priestess. Others say she died on the altar, brave and noble, accepting her role with grace. Historians still argue over which ending is older, more authentic, more aligned with ancient values. Fringe scholars suggest neither ending is true, that she simply disappeared because the story didn't need her anymore. You greet her gently. She doesn't flinch, doesn't speak either, just slices a fig in half and gestures to the seat across from her. You sit. She finally speaks. They told me I was a gift. A pause. For what? You don't answer. She doesn't expect you to. They brought me to the altar. In my finest dress, she continues. Said it would honor me. Said it would bring glory to Greece. She lifts a fig, and I was supposed to smile through it. She takes a bite, chews slowly. It's strange, she says, how easily a girl becomes a symbol when her father needs to look brave. You ask if Artemis really saved her. She smiles bitterly. I like that version, she says. It means I got to live. A beat. But then again, what kind of life is this? You look around. The cottage is bare but clean. A few scrolls, a small loom, herbs drying on a string above the hearth. You know what no one ever writes about, she asks. What happened after? She wipes fig juice from her fingers. Being saved isn't the same as being safe. You ask what she means. They saved me from the knife, she says, and then sent me to serve forever in silence. Her eyes flash. I was traded, not rescued. Traded between gods like a coin. Her voice doesn't rise, doesn't shake, but it cuts like flint. You know what's worse than being sacrificed? She asks. You shake your head, being expected to understand it. She leans forward. They said I was brave, obedient, pious. A long pause, but no one ever asked if I was angry. You sit with her in the silence that follows. She eats another fig, more slowly this time. You ask what she would have chosen if they had asked. Her eyes soften for the first time. I don't know, she says. I would have liked a garden, a real one, not a symbolic one. She gestures out the window. Nothing but dirt and wind. They all talk about my sacrifice, she says. No one talks about my life. You stand unsure what to offer. She seems tired of words. So instead you gently reach for one of the drying herbs above the hearth, a sprig of thyme, and hand it to her. She takes it, nods, and says softly, maybe next time they'll let us tell it ourselves. The wind picks up as you leave Iphigenia's cottage, the thyme scent still lingering in your fingertips. It's colder now, sharper, the kind of cold that finds your collarbones and waits there. The light is fading into that strange in-between state, not quite sunset, not quite twilight. You walk on drawn by something you can't yet see but feel. The ground turns uneven. Stone becomes sand, and the air shifts. It smells like salt again, but not of hope like with Nausicaa. It smells like endings. And there she is, standing ankle-deep in tide foam, hair wild dress soaked to the waist. She's not looking at you. She's looking at the horizon. Her name is Scylla. You know her as the sea monster, tentacles, snarling mouths, a nightmare of the rocks. A creature Odysseus had to sail past, sacrificing his men, rather than risk the whirlpool on the other side. But she wasn't always a monster, and she didn't ask to become one. Historians still argue who cursed her. Was it Circe, jealous of Glaucus's love for her? Was it Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife, angry at a sea god's wandering eyes? Fringe retellings say Scylla transformed herself in despair, in grief, trying to escape the gaze of gods entirely. You approach slowly. She turns, finally, and her eyes are entirely human. I heard you were coming, she says. You step into the surf beside her. Cold rushes up your legs. She doesn't seem to feel it. They always come, she continues, but they never stay. You ask if she remembers what it was like before. She smiles, and it's a painful thing. Before I was a threat, she nods slowly. I was admired, not for her mind, not for her art, just her face, her skin, her body. They all wanted to possess it, she says. Not see me, just own me. She lifts her hand. It's trembling. I tried to disappear, a pause. I prayed to be invisible. She looks at the water, and I got what I asked for. You ask what she means. They stopped looking, she says. Once I became monstrous. The waves slap harder, now foam climbing her calves. I used to wait here, she says, thinking maybe someone would look closer, would see what I became and still stay. She chuckles. Instead, they wrote warnings on maps. You ask if she ever hurt anyone on purpose. She thinks. No, she says. But I didn't stop it either. She lifts her hand again, and for a moment you see the hint of transformation. Skin, rippling tendrils, half forming like pain made visible. I scared them, she says, and that was the first time they respected me. She looks back at you. I don't like it, but I don't hate it either. You ask if she would undo it, if she could go back, be mortal again. She closes her eyes. I don't think there's a back, she says, just away. She kneels in the water now, the sea pulling at her dress. They always say I was cursed, but maybe I was just changed. Her voice softens. Changed by looking too long at power and being seen only as a body. She stands again, and suddenly she's taller than she was, not just in height, in presence. You see the shimmer of something under her skin scales, shadows, memories. She isn't hiding anymore, and it's not monstrous, it's survival. I don't need them to love me, she says. I just need them to stop lying about what happened. She turns back to the horizon. Waves climbing higher, sky turning steel gray, and you, standing beside her, whisper the question you've been holding since the journey began. What do you want remembered? She answers without turning. That I didn't disappear. I just changed into something they couldn't control. Then the waves pull back gently, and she walks with them. Not vanishing, not retreating, just choosing the ocean again, this time on her terms. You stand there, long after Scylla is gone. The surf has receded, the wind too. All that's left is the hush, soft, steady, almost like breath. It's darker now, not quite night. That strange blue hour, where shadows stretch long and Everything feels like it's waiting to become something else. You turn inland one last time. The path is familiar. You've walked it already, through fire-lit caves and forgotten homes, through stories half told and endings rewritten. But this time, your steps carry the weight of what you've heard. This time, you know where you're going. A grove, quiet, sheltered. The air smells of cypress and honeyed wine. There's a woman kneeling by the base of a tree, hands pressed into the earth. Her hair is bound in copper thread, her eyes closed. She's humming. You sit nearby, silently, not wanting to disturb her. But she opens her eyes anyway, and smiles, not kindly, not coldly, just knowingly. "Of course you'd come last to me," she says. You blink. "I always come last," she adds, her name Psyche. Yes, that's Psyche, the woman who married Eros. The girl told she was too beautiful to be human. The mortal whose love story was supposed to be a fairy tale. And maybe it was. But fairy tales often cut out the blood. Historians still argue if her myth was meant to be empowering or punishing. Was she a warning, a celebration? Fringe thinkers say she was a recycled template from older goddesses, her story sanitized into something palatable for marriageable daughters. You ask what she remembers. She brushes her fingers over the soil. They said, "I was more beautiful than Aphrodite," she says. "So they punished me." You nod. She smiles. But the punishment was love, she adds. A beat. They think that softens the blow. You ask if she loved Eros. She looks at you for a long time. "I did, but they forget what they made me do to earn him." She lists it on her fingers, sorting seeds until my hands bled, fetching golden wool from murderous sheep, descending into the underworld. Alone, each word lands like a stone. You ask if it was worth it. Another long pause. Then, that's the wrong question. She gestures around the grove. This piece is not what I was promised, but it's what I found. A breeze stirs the trees. You glance down. The soil beneath your feet is scattered with petals, pale and soft. They weren't there before. "Do you know what love did to me?" she asks. You shake your head. "It made me invisible. Then it made me divine. Then it made me disappear. Again." She tilts her head. "Can you imagine being turned into a goddess? Just so no one remembers your suffering." You sit with that. She reaches for something beside her, an old oil lamp. "It all started with this," she says, the lamp from the night she looked at her husband defying his demand for blindness. They call it curiosity, she says, but really it was just needing to see the truth. She lights the lamp, and the flame dances. You stare into it, and slowly realize it's not casting shadows. It's erasing them. "I wasn't weak," she says. "I was tested." Her voice lowers. "And I passed." You watch the flame flicker, devour reveal. And for the first time tonight, you don't feel like a visitor. You feel like a witness. She hands you the lamp. It's warm, solid, and heavier than you expected. I don't need you to tell my story, she says. I just need you to remember it. The flame steadies. You rise. She stays. And behind you the grove fades, not vanished, just resting, a place you might return to when you're ready, when you need reminding. That beauty is not a gift, it's a danger. And sometimes it's the beginning of something bigger than myth. And now we're slowing down. The path has been long, twisting through temples and tides, through the quiet spaces where women once waited for someone to listen. But you listened, and they mattered. You've heard their anger, their weariness, their softness. You've sat beside them on cliffs and in caves, in homes made of silence and strength. You've carried their names, Theano, Nausicaa, Iphigenia, Scylla, Psyche, not as monsters or muses, but as women who deserved more than footnotes. And now, as the last voices fade, the world softens. The air is cool. The stars blink awake, one by one, like timid fireflies peeking through gauze. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls. You breathe slower now. The lamp Psyche gave you still flickers gently in your thoughts, not demanding, not blinding, just enough light to remember by. You don't have to carry every story, just one. Whichever stayed with you the longest, whichever still echoes when your head touches the pillow. And in that remembering, in that quiet, honoring these women live again, not as monsters, not as myths, but as echoes too powerful to erase. So, rest easy tonight. There's nothing more you need to do, no more steps to take. The stories have ended. The world is still, and you are not alone.